Imagine living thousands of years ago and finding a nest filled with eggs. Some look perfectly normal, while others are cracked, dirty, or strangely colored. There are no supermarkets, no food labels, and no scientist nearby to warn you. One egg could provide valuable nutrition, but another could make you seriously sick. So how did ancient humans figure out which eggs were safe? The surprising answer is that they did not know with absolute certainty. Instead, they learned through observation, experience, smell, appearance, animal behavior, and generations of trial and error. Long before humans understood bacteria or food poisoning, they were already developing simple ways to decide what food was worth eating. For early humans, eggs were an incredible source of nutrition. They contained protein, fat, vitamins, and minerals all packed inside a small shell. Birds, reptiles, and other animals laid eggs in many different places, so humans could find them near rivers, forests, cliffs, grasslands, and caves. But finding an egg was only the beginning. The real challenge was deciding whether it was still good. One of the first clues was probably the condition of the shell. A fresh egg generally has a clean, intact shell. Ancient people would have noticed that eggs with large cracks, leaking contents, or badly damaged shells were more suspicious. A cracked egg could have been exposed to dirt, insects, or other contaminants. Without understanding microorganisms, people could still learn that damaged food was more likely to cause problems. But appearance alone was not enough. Ancient humans had another powerful tool: their noses. Smell can reveal when many foods have started to spoil. A fresh egg has a relatively mild smell, but a rotten egg can produce an extremely unpleasant sulfur-like odor. Humans did not need to understand chemistry to recognize that a terrible-smelling egg was probably something they should avoid. This knowledge could have been especially important because early humans lived closely connected to nature. They constantly watched animals, plants, weather, tracks, and changes in their environment. They were not simply eating whatever they found, they were observing patterns.
For example, imagine a small group discovering a bird's nest. One person eats an egg and becomes sick later. The group remembers what happened. The next time they find similar eggs, they may become more cautious. Over many generations, these experiences could become practical knowledge. Certain eggs were usually safe, while certain types, locations, or conditions were best avoided. And this is where ancient knowledge becomes fascinating. Humans did not need microscopes to discover that something was dangerous. They could discover danger through consequences. People also learned from animals. If a bird was sitting on its eggs, that behavior provided information. The egg belonged to a living animal and was probably relatively fresh. If humans found abandoned eggs, they might have been more cautious, especially if the eggs had been exposed to heat, rain, insects, or predators for a long time. However, not every egg was safe simply because it looked normal. Different species produce very different eggs, and some animals can produce eggs that humans should not eat. Ancient people therefore had another advantage: local knowledge. They knew which animals lived in their environment. They recognized nests, tracks, calls, and habitats. Someone who had grown up around a particular landscape could know far more about local eggs than a modern person who had never seen them before. Children probably learned much of this knowledge by watching adults. Imagine an older hunter returning to camp with eggs. Before eating them, he examines the shells. He smells them. He may crack one open and inspect its contents. Younger members of the group watch carefully. Eventually, they copy the behavior. In this way, survival knowledge could pass from one generation to the next without books or schools. Cooking also changed the equation. Fire gave humans a powerful way to make many foods safer and more digestible. Heating an egg thoroughly can kill many harmful microorganisms that may be present. Ancient humans did not know about bacteria, but they could discover through experience that cooked food often lasted differently and caused fewer problems than certain raw foods. Of course, ancient humans still got food poisoning. There was no perfect system. Sometimes they made mistakes. some people became sick, and some probably died from contaminated food. Natural selection and cultural learning would favor groups that became better at recognizing risky foods. There was another simple test humans could use: time. An egg that had just been collected from a nest was very different from one that had been sitting in the hot sun for days. Without refrigerators, ancient people had to pay attention to environmental conditions. Heat could accelerate spoilage. Moisture and dirt could also affect food. So people learned that freshly collected food was generally preferable to food that had been sitting around for too long. But perhaps the most interesting part is that humans did not need to understand the invisible world to survive in it.
Bacteria are microscopic. Viruses are invisible. Foodborne pathogens cannot be identified just by looking at them. Yet humans developed practical survival rules long before modern science explained why those rules worked. They learned, if it smells terrible, be careful. If it is badly damaged, avoid it. If it has been sitting around too long, be suspicious. If animals avoid it, pay attention. If people repeatedly become sick after eating something, remember the connection. These rules were not perfect, but they were useful. And there is one more important clue. Taste was probably not the first test. A tiny taste might seem harmless, but consuming contaminated food can still cause illness. Humans likely relied heavily on visible condition, smell, freshness, and previous experience before deciding to eat something. Over thousands of years, this kind of knowledge became increasingly sophisticated. Different cultures developed their own traditions for collecting, storing, preparing, and cooking eggs and other foods. What began as simple survival observations eventually became food traditions passed down through families and communities. So, did ancient humans actually know which eggs were safe? Not in the modern scientific sense. They did not know about salmonella. They didn't understand microbes. They couldn't measure temperature or inspect an egg under a microscope. Instead, they built a practical knowledge system from the world around them. They watched, they smelled, they remembered, they copied experienced people, and most importantly, they learned from mistakes. Every safe meal reinforced a useful behavior. Every case of sickness taught a painful lesson. Over generations, those lessons accumulated into something surprisingly powerful: survival knowledge. Today, we can simply open a refrigerator, check an expiration date, and cook an egg according to food safety guidelines. Ancient humans had none of those conveniences. Yet when they found an egg lying in a nest, they were not completely helpless. They had something else: experience. And perhaps that is one of the greatest survival tools humans ever developed. Not knowing everything, but knowing how to observe the world, recognize patterns, remember mistakes, and pass those lessons to the next generation. The next time you crack open an egg for breakfast, remember, long before refrigerators, supermarkets, and food safety labels, humans were already asking the same basic question: can I eat this? And their answer came from thousands of years of watching nature, learning from experience, and surviving one meal at a time.